I bet you want to have more money, and I definitely want you to have more money. Even if you don't keep it, maybe you give it away to a cause you want to support, or you can use it for your higher purpose, or you leave a legacy for your family. I say that I think that you want more money because I have an opportunity to talk to a handful of people that watch videos on the channel every week. And I hear time and again one of two things. Either people want to make more money, or they want to figure out how to make money in a way that aligns to their higher purpose and doesn't make them feel like they need to sell their soul in order to get that done. Well, in order to do those things, we've got to reinstall the money software that we have running around in our brains. So money is intimately tied to fear. I'm sure you feel that, right? When our bank account gets low, we start to worry. We start to wonder how we're going to afford our rent, how we're going to feed our kids. These are real fears. I get it. Ultimately, what that fear boils down to is failure. Now, in order to understand this better, I want to rewind time and go back to when we were hunter-gatherers and think about what failure meant for them, because our brains are still operating on the same hardware that our hunter-gatherer ancestors had. So if we understand their failure and what it meant, we can understand what money means for us now. So failure meant one of two things. It meant being cast out, meaning we're no longer welcome to our tribe, which means we can't reproduce, which is a huge driver for humans. Or it means that you didn't have the time or the energy to hunt and find water and build shelter and all of those things. The other thing that failure meant ultimately is not being able to find resources. So we run out of deer meat or water or berries or stuff to make clothing or shelter. And without resources, ultimately, both of these things lead to our true fear at the deepest level, which is death. Or another way to think about this is non-existence. Sometimes people think of death and they immediately say, I'm not afraid to die. And I'm not so much talking about the act of death itself, as much as I'm talking about the fear of non-existence, the fear that you just disappear and there is nothing, just this blackness that happens. So our brains are convinced on a deep level that a lack of money means death. And when you understand that, you start to see clearly how this lack mindset has permeated everything around us. If we believe we're going to die, of course we're going to hoard resources. Of course we're going to make people work in horrible conditions for crap money so that we can keep as much of the profit as is humanly possible. All of this is born from this deep fear of death. However, now, because we have largely solved the problem of staying alive, right? We've figured out a way to meet our basic needs most of the time, especially in developed countries. And so this fear has been projected onto something entirely different. And that is money. So I'm going to read now from the 30-second gene key. And it's from page 251 for those of you that have the book here. Our collective fear of survival is almost entirely projected onto the amount of money we have. The fear of failure as a feeling inside your physical body is intimately linked with money. Your desire to have a bigger house or a faster car is actually born out of a huge collective energy field of fear and competition, which in turn is rooted in a much older fear. The larger your bank balance, the less chance there is of failure. That's how your mind thinks at the shadow frequency, and this is how money has become the great symbol of success in our modern world. So now I want to get into what I call the brain zoo, so that you have a little bit of a better understanding of how our brains work and function. And I'm going to break it into 3 different pieces. And the first one is what's called the reptile mind. And this is the oldest part of our brains. It is ancient, dinosaur times, hence reptile, older than that even. And it's our brainstem and our cerebellum, and it controls things like our breathing, our respiration, our heart rate. And then our cerebellum controls things like balance and posture and movement coordination. And it's also responsible for hardwiring old behaviors and memories that kind of train humanity at large, if you will. So this part of our brain is still very active, is the point here. And needed, of course, right? We need to breathe. Then we've got the mammalian mind. And the mammalian mind is also known as the limbic system, right? So it's if you're familiar with that term, this is the hippocampus, the amygdala, and it evolved like 300 million years ago. And it's the thing that regulates fight, flight, or freeze responses in a big way, as well as to the need to feed and reproduce. So we're still walking around with this system. And it's the thing from 300 million years ago that told us whether we needed to fight or run. And so when we become unconscious, when we are not aware of what's happening, we immediately snap into one of these 2 minds. And in doing that, we lose our ability to really see what's happening. We lose our ability to discern how to move forward in reality in a way that actually aligns to what's happening around us. All we can see is fight or run. We can't see the vast amount of options that we have available to us if only we can turn on our creativity. This brain is also responsible, this mammalian mind is also responsible for hormone function and the pineal gland, which regulates sleep. So not only do we have this deep fight or flight response, but we've also got our pituitary gland putting out all of these different hormones that make us feel really sad or really scared. And until we are deeply in touch with ourselves, we think that we are those emotions. We have a hard time seeing them and letting them pass through us. And that brings us to the third brain, which is our primate mind. And this is the neocortex. So this is our decision making, our meaning making, our problem solving, our creativity, all the things that make us uniquely human, all the things that allow us to stay present and aware and remember that there is a higher power that's looking out for us. It's the command center. It's where we plan and analyze and verbalize and learn, and it allows us to interpret events and respond appropriately to them. So this is the newest part of our mind, but it is hundreds of thousands of years old also. So you can see the point here is that our brain, our hardware, doesn't match the software. So we've got to understand how to reprogram the software so that it applies to all of the hardware instead of just this primate mind. So that when things get difficult and we feel fear, we can acknowledge it for what it is, take it in, but find a way to move past it in a way that serves the world. That's ultimately the question that you constantly need to come back to when you're thinking about money. How can I be of the greatest service of the whole? Because when you think about that question and answer it earnestly, the money will just flow to you. So how has our brain dealt with this? Oh, I didn't know it was a magnet. How has our brain dealt with this fear? Well, we created a myth like we do with everything. Story is what allows us to move. And this is what I call the capitalist money myth. And this is the current myth that operates through the world today. And essentially it is hustle and grind. If you try hard enough, then you will be successful. You get out there, you kill yourself, you work 80 hours a week, you focus only on business, your family be damned, you gotta grind, Gary V culture, right? That is the way. And if you aren't successful, it's because you're not working hard enough, which is just a complete and total farce. There's what are called the dilemmas in the Gene Keys. So if you've ever listened to the audios, I think is there 2 L's in dilemma? I have no idea. If you listen to the audios, you will find that each gene key has a dilemma. And the dilemma of the 34th gene key is trying. We're just trying so hard and we can't make money and we don't understand why. So one of my favorite wisdom quotes actually comes from Star Wars, from Yoda specifically. And what he says is, do or do not. There is no try. And the reason that he says that is that trying means that you're forcing things. You're fighting against the flow of the universe. You're fighting against nature. You're not taking in the reality. Instead, you're locked into that fight, flight, or freeze response. So we've got to learn how to get out of trying. And that 34th gene key gives us a clue. It is force at the shadow level. So at a low frequency, we try and force everything. We're gonna make it happen no matter what, the world be damned. And that leads us to strength. And this is, yes, outer strength, but at a deeper and more important level, this is inner strength. It's cultivating the awareness and knowing that you're going to be okay, that you're going to be safe. It's the strength to stay true to your values and to yourself and to who you really are, instead of going to a job that eats your soul. Instead of trying to come up with all of these harebrained schemes to make your next buck, even though it has nothing to do with who you want to be or how you want to show up in the world. When we start to tune in to that strength, what we realize is that the biggest part of this myth simply isn't true. And what that is that there's not enough blank. You can insert it there, right? There's not enough resources. There's not enough time. There's not enough money. There's not enough, you name it. This is just a story that comes from not having the inner strength and fortitude needed to stick to your faith, to stick to truth. And so when we believe that there's not enough, what we think is, I better get mine. Regardless of what that means for Gaia, regardless of what that means for the people that work with me or for me, none of that matters. What matters is that I accumulate as many resources as humanly possible so that I can allay that fear that I spoke about. Because the bigger my bank balance, the less chance I have of failing. That's what the shadow frequency believes. It also tells you that you need lots of stuff. This is where consumerism is born. You need lots of stuff external to you because you're not whole yourself. And what if things go sideways and you don't have the XYZ newest gadget that keeps you safe when the sun falls out of the sky, or you don't have 9 million months of MREs stacked up in case a tsunami hits the East Coast. You feel like you need to hoard things. You need to gather as much stuff as you can because of this fear of failure, and because this myth makes you feel like you're not whole. It makes you feel like you need things external to you. It makes you feel like you don't know what you're doing. So it's not even just stuff, it's also knowledge, right? It's let me package up this thing that you need to know. And when you know this thing, that's what's going to reinstall this money software and allow you to show up and make tons of money in the world. And none of that is true. What I'm doing right now is pointing you back into yourself, not giving you the answers that you need. I know that might be frustrating for some of you. So that brings us to, okay, we understand that money is just the current hiding place of this deep-seated fear. We understand how our brain works and that we need to overcome millions of years of evolution so that we can use the proper parts of our brain. We see what the current story is around money. Now, what is the story that I need to tell myself so that I can reinstall this software? And really, there's a couple things that you need. First and foremost, you need faith. You need to believe that there is some force, something, someone that is looking out for your best interest, and that everything is going to be okay. You need to feel at home in your physical body. You need to feel whole. You need to feel safe. Until you believe that, you're constantly going to be running away from this fear of failure. There is no moving up and out of the lower frequencies until you have this faith, until you believe that you're okay. Because you're constantly going to be needing to hoard resources. You're constantly going to think you need to take in more information because you're not okay on your own. And the way to get this faith in the world of the gene keys is by engaging with your activation sequence. That's what the activation sequence is all about. Yes, I know it's purpose and life's work and all of that, but on a deeper level, the way that we are able to fulfill those things is by coming into contact with this deep level of faith. Now, if you're not in the gene keys, that's okay. There's lots of other ways. You could study the Bhagavad Gita, you could study the Bible, you could study the Tao Te Ching, you could study Hermeticism, you name it. I don't care. Whatever you need, whatever system resonates with you, all you need is faith, whatever way you want to get there. The other thing that we need to understand, and it's part of faith, is universal laws. So for example, the law that all is mind, that everything is kind of a projection and an illusion. What that does is it creates a little bit of space from the physical and from our immediate circumstances. It helps us to remember that we're on this rock flying through space and that anything could happen at any moment. And the fact that we think more money is going to solve our problem is comical when you think about it, when we zoom out far enough. So understanding universal laws can be really helpful in allowing you to drop below this fear and to show up in the world with your purpose first, with service first. And by asking this question, how can I best serve the whole? Money starts to come back to you. So let's talk about prosperity. So I've been talking about money, which is part of prosperity. You need enough money to fulfill your higher purpose. You need enough money to enjoy life. This is supposed to be fun, I promise. But prosperity also involves balancing the other components of our lives. So if we have a ton of wealth, a ton of money, but our relationships are absolute trash, that's not prosperity. If we have a ton of money, but our physical health is in shambles, that's not prosperity. So we've got to understand that when it comes to money, what we need is balance. We need the right amount of money for us, and that's different for everybody. The amount of money that I need is different than the amount of money that you need, because the purpose that we have to fulfill in the world is different, and how we see the world is different. But when you come into faith, you will always have the money that you need. Exactly the right amount of money at exactly the right time. So I'm going to read now from page 253. When you raise your frequency beyond the reach of concepts such as success and failure, you remember that all of life moves in a great cosmic pattern. And as you let go into this pattern, you always find your natural support within it. The more evolved among humanity have found this truth reflected by the way in which individual finances operate. When you surrender to the greater pattern and raise your consciousness above the fear threshold, money always arrives just when it is needed. Money actually provides a wonderful lesson in letting go of fear, and in many respects it has become one of the new spiritual teachers on our planet. That's exactly what I was just talking about. One of my favorite stories from Tony Robbins is a story that he has from very early on in his career. And he was down to like his last 20 bucks. And he walked into this restaurant, and he was gonna buy himself a meal and sit there and think about what the heck he was gonna do. And when he got in there, he saw a young kid and his mom. And they were talking, and his mom started crying, and she got up and left to go to the bathroom. And Tony, being the compassionate man that he is, went over there and talked to the kid and said, "Hey, what's going on, man? Is everything okay?" And the kid went on to say that, like, "Hey, my mom is really upset. Like, we don't know how we're going to be able to pay for our rent. We don't know how we're going to be able to keep living." And Tony looked at him, took the 20 bucks that he had, put it on the table, and said, "Buy your mom a nice meal. Just enjoy it right now. She'll be grateful." And then he left. And he had no idea how he was gonna pay his bills, how he was even gonna eat his next meal. And when he got home, in the mailbox was a check. And I forget the amount, but it was like the exact amount that he needed to pay his rent so that he could keep moving on. And the point of that is, when you overcome this fear, you get exactly what you need when you need it. Another thing that's interesting to think about here is the scientific term entropy. So entropy, the second law of thermodynamics, is essentially that systems degrade, things degrade, right? Any system loses energy over time. And in other words, we're moving towards disorder. What a dismal view of the universe, right? But I believe, Richard Rudd, the founder of the Gene Keys, believes that what's happening there is that science isn't seeing the whole picture. They're only seeing part of the system, and that's why it appears that energy is being leaked out of it, that we're losing energy, that things are falling apart. But there's another way to see things. So this is Richard's law of thermodynamics. Infinite systems exist in infinite dimensions. On account of this truth, the existence of closed systems can be seen as false. And when we talk about entropy, we're talking about a closed system, which just means it's like a closed loop. We see all the parts and pieces. The perceived openness, though, of any system is always equivalent to the frequency of consciousness pervading it. It is therefore the degree of openness of a given system to its own multidimensional nature that directly determines the flow of energy through that system. In other words, how open you are to the things you cannot see, how open you are to faith, how open you are to the higher frequencies, to miracles, determines if entropy affects us or not. And so by raising our frequency, we're able to create this toroidal energy field around us, right? Where it leaves us, it circles back around, and everything we put out comes back to us in a flow. And that's really what prosperity is. It's a flow. So wealth is, oh boy, accumulation. Meaning we try and get money and we try and hoard it. We try and hold onto it as tightly as we can because remember, it's being driven by that fear. And so the bigger our bank account balance, the less fear we think we need to have, which again is just absurd, right? A comet could hit this planet at any moment. God forbid, we could get into a car accident. Like life can change in an instant. And so what we have to understand is that prosperity is a flow. So as something comes in, we've got to press it out. We've got to push it into service. And in doing that, we create a vacuum, which allows the next set of resources to come to us, exactly the resources that we need to fulfill our higher purpose, exactly the money that we need to fulfill our higher purpose. But that only happens when we seal the triangle, the money triangle. So this comes from the Pearl sequence. Our first pathway of the Pearl sequence is known as the pathway of initiative. And coming up out of the pathway of initiative is the pathway of growth. So first we must take action, aligned action, meaning we need to feel into our hearts and ask ourselves, what is it that I actually want to bring out into the world? Not how can I make money, not how can I avoid feeling pain or suffering or failure, but what does my heart actually want to bring out into the world? And after we do that, then we start to grow. The universe sees that we took the initiative and it starts to give us more resources, the people that we need, a space that we needed. All of these things start to grow and come into us. However, until we close this triangle, which happens at this third and final pathway, which is the pathway of service, it seals the triangle. It's what allows that toroidal energy field to happen. And that's why accumulating wealth short circuits money. We've got to push it back out and create that vacuum. Another thing that's really important to understand here is that money and the drive for it is often driven by this deep, deep archetypal hunger that moves through humanity. And this is actually the shadow of my SQ. It's the 35th gene key. It is this drive for more, this need for more money, more food, more sex, more resources, more relationships, more business, more TV, more you name it. It's just this raw hunger. And that very easily translates to money. However, what you realize when you investigate this hunger is that it is not there to be satisfied. In fact, it can't be satisfied. What it is a urge to grow. It's an urge to evolve. an urge to learn, an urge to give back. And once you understand that it's not there to be satiated, once you understand that you're constantly going to feel this hunger, then we can use it. We can press it into service. So now I'm going to read from page 273. In a nutshell, the 35th shadow diverts true progress out into the world of form, thus sacrificing its potential to transform the inner structure of humanity itself. Because of this shadow, the outer world evolves at the cost of the inner world. So this is a desire for the inner world to grow, but we press it into, how can I get more money? Now from 274, in effect, you have to come to realize that whether you starve yourself or stuff yourself, you're never going to solve this problem. So what you'll feel on a deep level is when you are full, the hunger that you feel is to be empty. And when you're empty, the hunger that you feel is to be full. And that's what I mean, it can never be satiated. It can never be satisfied. And when you realize this, you will see how helplessly you are held hostage by this hunger. And I'm speaking about all of these things from personal experience. Hunger was the driver of my life for decades. In fact, after the Marine Corps, I went back to college, and instead of thinking about what I wanted to do in the world, right, how I wanted to serve, what I thought was, how can I make the most money? And I wound up getting a degree in finance because that's where all the money is. Luckily, the universe works in mysterious ways, and I also got a business education, which has allowed me to build a business that did millions of dollars, and now I'm doing this, and I've made a good chunk of money in a short period of time because I understand these ideas. I'm speaking from something that I have been through. But what I found when I got money, I thought this hunger, right? I thought that it was going to fulfill me, but what I realized is that it didn't bring any purpose to me, any meaning to me, any fulfillment to me. And if you talk to any wealthy person you know, they will tell you the same thing. You hear it over and over and over again. Look at somebody like Robin Williams or Anthony Bourdain, who had, outwardly looking in, had it all. They had all of these resources, so much wealth. And inside they were empty. And it can be even worse for people that work their whole life to get these resources, and then they come and they have this hollow feeling. And that's what happened to me. It's like, well, what do I do now? I went 15 or 20 years, these guys, 30, 40, 50 years. And now what? And that is a place of despair. And so from personal experience, once I got it, I was in this void space, and it really affected me on a deep level, and I had to go back to the drawing board and figure out, how can I make myself feel a little bit better? And what I realized is that money is a tool. It's a proxy, it's a symbol. It carries weight, yes, and it carries energy, yes. But ultimately, it does nothing more than that. And accumulating anything, turns into a burden. It's more to look over, it's more to manage, it's more to watch. It gets heavy to carry. So all of this to say, there's really no reason to worry about money. And I know you're thinking, easy for you to say. If you knew my financial situation right now, and what I was going through, and what I have been going through, and what I grew up in, you wouldn't be saying that. That's why I'm telling you that this is about reinstalling the software that's running around in your mind. And until you believe that, you're never going to be truly rich. You're never going to be satisfied. I'd love to talk to you more about this. I do a free call every couple of weeks. I call it a wisdom call. The next one is a week from Thursday. You'll find the link in the description. We just do a call with the community. There's 20 or 30 people there, and we talk about how can I make more money? What about this gene key? What about XYZ? You name it. My desire there is to be of service to you, to help you move the needle. And the goal is, between these videos and those calls, I really think that I can help transform people's lives. So I hope to see you there. Thank you. Until next time.